medieval period, pilgrimages to the shrines of saints were a popular contemporary way of repenting for sins. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, a collection of stories told by pilgrims who represent a wide cross-section of Chaucer's contemporary society. The Merchant's Tale, The Wife of Bath, The Clerk and the Franklin all produce and constitute a marriage tale. In particularly, The Merchant's Tale is seen as in response to The Clerk's Tale, with the merchant's character May directly contrasting the patience of Griselda. The Fableaux was the first narrative in France in the 13th century, written by and for the entertainment of the nobility. They are characterised by sexual and scatological obscenity, often exploring views contrary to the church in a comical way. At its core, The Merchant's Tale is certainly a fableau, framed by the classic episodes of the mismatched marriage between January and May. However, in no fableau does the narrator stop to engage in philosophical debate complete with classical, biblical and mythological references. Chaucer ironically uses these to undermine typical fableau. He does this through the use of courtly love romance, show between the characters, and love between May and Damien. However, even this relationship is portrayed as rooted in the same physicality as displayed by the lecherous January and his desire. One of the most typical tropes of the fableau is the senex amans, which January is the epitome of. He, as an old man, is adamant on having a virgin young girl. On the screen now are some key quotes to represent January's characterization. For example, although January admits to being hoar and old, he still describes himself as green as Laura. Here we see an irony of self.
In the medieval period, real-life marriage was rarely undertaken for love. In upper classes, consolidation of title, land and money were paramount, and marriage between young girls and elderly men was quite common. In fact, Chaucer's own granddaughter Alice was first married in her early teens to a man in his 50s. Like the upper class, people married for business contracts or to have children. Many women were in unhappy marriages. They had to obey their husbands sexually and cannot dispose of their own money. Very much like January's search for a wife, it wasn't uncommon to buy a bride in medieval times. Society blamed women for all physical, intellectual and moral weaknesses, and biblical auxorité was used to support misogyny. Many believe that as female genitalia is inside their body, this makes them inferior to men. The Greek philosopher Galen also argued that sexual desire in women was uncontrollable, and consequently believed that women had the medical need to have regular sex. This led to the belief that men and women were indebted to one another. Wives believed that their womb would suffocate if they did not have sex. We could almost say that marriage was a mercantile transaction, and was also a sacrament of the church, involving the exchange of vows of care and fidelity. January's garden could be interpreted in many ways, and mainly linked to the Garden of Eden story found in the Bible. January could be seen as Adam, May could be seen as Eve, and Damien could be seen as the serpent. Damien tempts May to sin, and January is tempted to sin by May. However, May doesn't need much persuasion to embark on this affair. Also, January's upbringing in Pavie has already associated him with immorality. Therefore, May doesn't tempt him to sin. January views his garden as his paradise on earth, equating it to the Garden of Eden. He also views his garden as a place of sexual experimentation, and May and Damien enact their desires. From a consumerist angle, we could say that January buys his garden for business. He objectifies women, views sex as a debt, and sees marriage as a garden of delights rather than a spiritual reunion. This garden could also be linked to Roman de la Rose, which is a poem about chivalry and courtly love. However, the rose in this poem is unobtainable, but May is obtainable to both men. Furthermore, the garden in the story has a barrier. However, Damien is able to access the key easily. The term hortus conclusus is a Latin term that translates as an enclosed garden. It has been used as a title for the Virgin Mary in medieval art. Mary is often depicted in a walled garden, which represents her closed and untouched body. This is ironic, as May is the total opposite. The garden symbolises the womb, and May allows two men to enter her body. The wall is also a metaphoric chastity belt, but May's imprinting of the key allows this to be unlocked. Pairs are often related to human sexuality because of its resemblance to female breast or male genitalia. The fact that May longs to have a pair is ironic because it reveals her appetite for sex and lust.
In the midst of the garden scene, the merchant diverts the reader's attention from January, May, and Damien in the pear tree to the gods Pluto and Proserpina, who are watching the scene from above. Chaucer utilises a device known as Deus ex machina, which is a convention of classical Greek theatre used to portray a moment of divine intervention. The Greek myth of Pluto's abduction of Proserpina would have been well known in medieval society, so the way in which their relationship mirrors that of January and May is deeply ironic. Pluto presents a misogynistic perspective, stating to his wife, 10,100,000 tales tellin I can, notable of your untruth and brutalness. He also claims women to be full of wickedness, villainy, and harlotry, which echoes the tone of the merchant in both the prologue and the ironic encomium on marriage. In direct contrast to her husband, Proserpina argues that there are many other men who have found women full true, full good and virtuous. She also argues, I am a woman, needs moot I speak, or else will till mine heart break. The inclusion of the gods, and significantly their argument, contributes three main things to the story. Firstly, their contradicting perspectives continue the debate on marriage and the nature of relationships between men and women, which has been explored throughout Chaucer's tales. For example, Proserpina granting May the wit to find a convincing excuse when accused gives her a sense of agency that is uncharacteristic of a medieval text. Secondly, the ironic parallels between the dynamic of relationship between Pluto and Proserpina and January and May highlights the satirical element of the story, and is perhaps Chaucer's own social commentary on the conventions of marriage. Finally, the presence of the gods introduces some order in the form of resolution to some of the plot's main issues. They can also be viewed as the moral authority in an otherwise bawdy fabulous tale.